I'm somebody who doesn't let herself drink or do drugs of any kind. Personally, I can't stand the idea of having a break in my stream of consciousness. I've reached a point where I'm confident enough in myself that I want to have complete control over my mind and body at all times. However, that wasn't always the case. About 4 years ago, I decided to sober up. I had a pretty serious problem with drinking, and almost all of my money went straight to pot. Now, this video isn't going to be some big lecture about how drugs are bad. In fact, I've had some extremely positive experiences with drugs and alcohol. They played a huge part in making me the person that I am today, and I'm thankful for that. This video is instead going to be a little retrospective on the good and the bad of that phase of my life. Really, it's a video that I'm just making for me. This stuff was my whole life for about 4 years though, so I've got a lot of memories to try and piece together today. However, since I can already see myself getting very nostalgic and rose-tinted in this video, I feel like I should go ahead and put out a little disclaimer. All of this stuff was very, very dangerous. Alcohol in particular came close to claiming my life on so many occasions that I can't even remember them all. Things that happened to me while I was drunk have been affecting me ever since. I watched so many of my friends fall off the deep end when it all started with the exact same behavior that I was exhibiting. Some of them died. Had I just decided to try Xanax as so many of my friends did, I don't know what would have happened to me, but I can guarantee that I wouldn't be here right now talking to you all about it. I am genuinely incredibly lucky to have made it out of those groups and those habits. Not a lot of my friends from that time can say the same thing. But I guess the best place to start with this video would be the place where so many other people got started with drugs. School. I was extremely unhappy in school. I've genuinely had people tell me that they thought I was gonna, make headlines. I don't think I was ever at risk for that, but I had dissociated so hard from everything around me. I remember every day I'd get dirty looks from teachers who could smell the cigarettes on my breath. I'd sleep through my classes, I'd ditch school and walk to the coffee shops, I'd give endless shit to my teachers. I'd intentionally get myself in school suspension so that I could sleep through the day and hang out with the other bad kids. I flunked out of my first high school, which was specifically for gifted kids, and eventually I dropped out for a year, winding up in online school after a bit. So that's kind of the headspace I was in that led to me becoming basically a loser for a few years. I used to be genuinely enthusiastic about education and being a normal member of society. I did my best in school and got good grades, right up to a certain point where something just came to me. Maybe my young, impressionable mind heard the wrong Pink Floyd album at the wrong time, maybe my depression started to kick in, maybe I was just tired, but at a certain point I seemingly just decided that nothing mattered. Nihilism had taken hold of me. My stupid 16-year-old self decided that she knew everything, and that all of these adults were trying to do nothing but indoctrinate her into a world that she wanted no part in. I wasn't just depressed, I had made myself an enemy. The system, or whatever. I didn't really know what I was fighting against, but the way to win the fight was to just withdraw from it all, and become the person that literally nobody wanted me to be. It started out as sleeping through class and smoking cigarettes, and it quickly turned into getting drunk and high as often as I could. This isn't anything special either. Basically everyone who got into drugs in high school has an extremely similar story. Still, that's how these things start. All I wanted was some control over the type of person that I was, and as somebody who hadn't yet learned the important life skills of personal development and commitment, the easiest way I could control who I was to simply dismantle myself entirely, and there's no faster way to do that than by drinking excessively. Somehow, I'd gotten a girlfriend at the time. We'd been dating for about a year, and I had already dropped out, and much to her concern, I started drinking and smoking pot and all of that. And this particular moment happened with me and her that I still remember vividly through the haze. It didn't seem like anything big at the time, but as it turns out, it was huge. I lied to her. This one night, she was texting me while I was hanging out with some friends, and I lied about being high. I told her that I was completely sober, and I got angry at her for assuming that I would be smoking, and said that I was tired of her always being on my back. Doesn't seem like a big deal, right? A 16-year-old kid tells her girlfriend to quit being such a nag. Who cares? Well, I had always been somebody who really valued honesty. One of my only sources of pride back then was that I would always own up to my mistakes and do what I could to make things right when I messed up. But this particular night was the first time that I decided to trade my honesty for drugs. Even my parents knew about my pot smoking, but there I was lying to the girl who cared about me enough to stay with me and keep supporting me in spite of my texts saying one thing and my Snapchat stories saying something else. Well, as it turns out, that would just be the first of many, many lies. That is, in my opinion, the moment that all of this stuff went from experimentation to a downward spiral. Honesty was like my only principle in the world, and with that gone, it meant that now I had zero principles besides fuck the system. So that would turn out to be the moment that set the stage for the next couple years of my life. I made a lot of friends, some of which I still keep in contact with today. I broke up with that girl and started dating a guy who may very well have been the biggest distributor in my town at the time. You know, the guy who sells to all the other dealers. Over those next 2 or so years, it was a whole lot of me, not even 18 yet, driving around drunk, or walking around town in the dead of night drinking vodka from a Burger King cup crying. And when I wasn't crying, I was passing out at parties with other kids my age. I cared so little about myself that even after being sexually assaulted by a dealer at a party while I was blackout drunk, I'd still hit him up later that week next time I needed to buy. The same thing actually happened with a different dealer at a later party, and of course my response at the time was the same. Trap culture is horrifying. But what was even scarier was this one night that I was camping with some friends. They were all the type of people who would drink enough to have fun, then call it there. I don't think they realized that I was the type of person to drink until I physically couldn't drink anymore. God, it feels weird even knowing that these words are written about me. It's so long ago. But at some point in the night, when all of us were long asleep, I remember somebody grabbing me while I was on my cot and rolling me to my side. As it turns out, I'd been lying on my back, throwing up and suffocating in my sleep. If he had been just a little bit more drunk, he probably wouldn't have woken up just from the sound of me coughing, and all of my friends would have woken up that morning to find me dead, with pale skin, blue fingers, bloodshot eyes, and cold vomit stuck to my face. At 17 years old, long before I would ever learn anything about personal fulfillment or how to create my own happiness. The worst thing about alcohol and drugs is that they make horrifying things seem like they really aren't a big deal. That camping story seemed like nothing but a fun little episode in my week when it happened. I wasn't worried about it. I also wasn't worried about the 27-year-old who was dating and living with my 16-year-old friend, or all those times I just barely avoided getting busted by cops while driving drunk or with pot in the car, or any of my friends who had already moved on to harder drugs. All that stuff just seemed perfectly normal to me. I was too young to know what normal was really supposed to be. Like I said, I was extremely lucky to make it out of that phase alive, and without anything super serious on my criminal record. How much of this stuff can be blamed on depression, and how much of it can be blamed on the drugs, is a question that I doubt I'll ever have the answer to. But the point stands that I was incredibly depressed. I still have depression, I still have suicidal thoughts, but in spite of all the danger it put me in, all of that partying taught me some seriously important things about myself that I don't think I would have learned so quickly otherwise. They taught me how to enjoy things. I don't know if I've ever seen a single family photo of me smiling before I was 16. I've seen picture after picture of me in all these beautiful places on family vacations, looking like I'd rather be laying in bed. Camping trips, concerts, going to the beach, taking beautiful hikes, visiting my extended family. Just one awkward grimace after the other, ruining all those photos. However, there was a very distinct shift right around the time I started smoking pot. Suddenly, I was laughing at the dumb sitcoms me and my family would watch over dinner. I was looking forward to concerts and camping trips. I was able to enjoy the dates I went on. I laughed and I cried, almost like a normal person. See, depression isn't just feeling sad. For me, it was always a complete lack of feelings altogether. Total apathy in all but the most extreme situations. As it turns out, all it took for me to start feeling emotions in a healthy way was a bit more estrogen and a bit less testosterone. But before gender dysphoria even started popping up on my WebMD searches, drugs were a band-aid solution to get me that same relief. It sure as hell wasn't healthy or sustainable, but before I ever transitioned and became a normal person, I was able to experience happiness and sadness just like anybody else. Knowing that I would feel things if I was high or drunk gave me a lot of self-confidence. A lot of feeling like I could finally understand what it was like to be a person, and so my social skills started blossoming like crazy. It's easy to just say drinking got rid of my inhibitions and made me more willing to talk to people and socialize, but I think it'd be more accurate for me to say that drugs simply made me a more emotional person, and that made it easier for me to connect with my fellow humans. I didn't feel so different from everyone else anymore. I didn't feel like there was something wrong with me. I know that that's the case, and that it wasn't simply alcohol making me chattier, because it's the exact same feeling I got when I started my hormones. Emotions became a part of my life again, and so I was able to connect with my fellow human beings more. It wasn't just drunken chattiness. Drugs had simply made me about as close to a normal, emotionally capable person as I could possibly have been before transitioning. All of this socializing gave way to an incredibly great group of friends. People who, even if we don't hang out anymore, will always have a special place in my heart. People who I was able to bond with in a way that I never, ever could have had I simply stayed apathetic, had I stayed sober. These emotions weren't all sunshine and lollipops, though. I was still suicidal. I was still doing all these awful things to myself. I was still getting pulled over on a weekly basis. I was still perfectly content living with my parents and working a dead-end job and spending all my money from that dead-end job on cigarettes, weed, and fast food in that order. However, as much of a horror story as the rest of this video has been, it's impossible for me to talk about that phase of my life and that friend group without talking about all the incredibly great experiences that drugs gave us together. I always hated when people talked about using drugs to escape from their problems or to suppress their sadness. That so wasn't me. I just did this stuff for fun. Or at least, that's what I thought at the time. Writing this video has reopened a few wounds for me and made me reflect on a lot of memories that might have been better off left buried. But it's made one thing painfully clear. My drug use, especially for those first 2 years before I got into that friend group, was exactly that. Me running away from how awful I felt when I was sober. Getting as fucked up as I possibly could so that I could simply numb the pain of being half a person. Well, that was the case in the last 2 years also, hanging out with that friend group, but I also learned some less self-destructive ways to numb the pain. I learned how to control myself. I could drink without getting blackout drunk. I could smoke without going through an ounce in a week. I could take a walk and simply enjoy it on its own merits, whether I was high or not. I could meditate and think about my past in positive, constructive ways. I could get toxic people out of my life. I could make friends. Honestly, it's hard for me to call that last year of my drug use anything but healthy, even though I know that that's far from the truth. Getting blackout drunk, that was a band-aid solution. It was quite literally just me fast-forwarding through the pain, getting some temporary relief and saving the pain for the next day. This, on the other hand, just getting kinda high with my homies and hanging out, well, I wasn't really hiding away from anything for more than a few hours at a time. I had the time I needed to reflect on myself and learn about who I was. I spent time meditating on how my ADHD has affected my life, how I had an addictive personality, why I kept distancing myself from all my friends and loved ones over the years, how I'd set myself up for failure on so many occasions. I even started to realize that even if I didn't know the words for it or the full extent of it at the time, I wasn't strictly a man. I still remember the night that I decided to sober up. Me and my homie Taka were on the couch smoking as usual. I think he was drinking a 40. I was probably bad for money and running low on pot at the time. It occurred to me that I didn't really feel so empty or insecure, even though I was barely even high. Really, all I felt was curiosity. Over the last year, I'd been clear-headed enough to be asking myself a lot of questions, and something just clicked inside of me. It was time for me to start finding answers to those questions. So I poured the rest of my pot into Taco's jar, and that was it. I haven't smoked pot or drank since. I distinctly remember my first day fully sober. That was the first night in at least 2 years that I didn't go to bed all that high, and much to my surprise, I woke up feeling super refreshed, not groggy at all like usual. I went about my normal business, clocked in, clocked out, played some video games, all of that, and then something occurred to me. I put a lid on driving while high or drunk, so this was the first time in years that I was about to drive at nighttime. I threw on Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band by the Beatles and simply drove to Walmart and back. Somehow, completely sober, I enjoyed that album more than I have in my entire life, before or since. In this alleyway, behind the Walmart, I realized that I had just made the best decision I ever made. I was thinking more clearly than I had in years. I felt proud of myself for making it a full day without drugs of any kind. No alcohol to numb me, no weed to get me laughing at dumb stuff, no shrooms to bore me, just me and my mind. It was at that moment that I learned a lesson that would have saved me a whole lot of torture and a couple gallons of tears had I learned it earlier. Even with depression and gender dysphoria and ADHD and all of that other stuff, I could still be my own best friend. Even at my loneliest, my mind can keep me company. Just looking at things with interest instead of apathy can make this world so worth existing in. That night, I had the most vivid dream that I've ever had. I was just walking up a mountain, nothing special, but I swear I could feel the dirt and grass under my feet. I could smell the trees in the wind and feel the sun on my skin. It was like I was high. About 6 months later, totally sober, I started a YouTube channel called Leadhead and uploaded my first video discussing Prey's meta-narrative. And that set me on the course of becoming the happiest that I've ever been. For all the good and all the bad that's come into and out of my life since then, I've always been my own best friend. And so, as lonely as this job gets sometimes, I never really feel alone, not like I used to. Not since that night at this Walmart. I stopped feeling like I'd rather have not been born. While depression and suicidal thoughts will never just go away for me, it was on that night that I learned a lesson that I'll never forget. I'd spent my whole life wanting control over my own destiny. Hell, control was the whole reason that I even started doing drugs in the first place. But the drugs didn't give me control. They simply controlled me, and I consented. On that night, I learned that I don't need any of that stuff to take control. I just need motivation. That was the night that I learned motivation, and even after all of these years sober, I'm still motivated. Motivation is what defines me now. I can't stand sitting on my hands, not doing anything productive. I started making real, positive changes in my life. YouTube, transitioning, falling in love in healthy ways. I went from thinking I was absolute trash to having an ego big enough to think that this video is worth making. And as much as I'd love to have a drink some nights, that transformation is the thing that I owe my life to. And I don't owe that transformation to drugs or alcohol or anything like that. I owe it to sobriety. See, sobriety is really weird. In a lot of ways, it feels even trippier than actually doing drugs. Even though I've now been sober for almost as long as I was using drugs to begin with, I still feel like I'm acclimated to these breaks in my stream of consciousness. I'm somebody who tends to have a whole lot of trouble compartmentalizing, categorizing, and segregating my problems so that I don't always feel so overwhelmed focusing on the big picture. Drugs, specifically alcohol, have always acted as a way for me to essentially stop existing and come back as another person with a fresh perspective, less tainted by the anxiety that comes with building up the scale of my own problems in my head. You know, like how every time you think about doing your taxes, it feels like a slightly bigger task. Well, becoming blackout drunk is what used to allow me to clear all that baggage and come at things with a fresh perspective. It feels really weird saying something positive about being blackout drunk, so I'd like to specify that this refreshment, it was a crutch for me, not something that I couldn't get by just fine without. I came to rely on it. However, let me dive a bit deeper into this before I move forward. Essentially, when you become blackout drunk, you're no longer conscious. I don't care what a doctor says. You can move and talk and all that, but it isn't really you doing it. When you wake up, you can look at the mess around you and intuit that somebody had fun, but it wasn't you. It was some other person using your body and your likeness. Maybe you aren't even the same person that you were before you started drinking the night before. How would you know? You have this gap in your memories, this missing link. Maybe you're a copy, a new consciousness equipped with the same memories and opinions just slotted into your old mind. Sure, we change and grow every day, but by losing your memories, you've created a gap in your consciousness, a missing link between the person you were yesterday and the person you woke up as today. It's kind of unsettling stuff, but back in the day, I swear that break in being alive is exactly what I was looking for. It really did make it easier to dissociate from my problems, which made them feel easier to tackle without crumbling from the pressure that I myself would impose. Maybe some of the people who knew me back then would disagree, but I honestly remember being way more productive back in those days. I'd handle my tasks as they came up without fail. My whole area would always be super clean. I'd always be the most efficient employee at work, whether I was doing deliveries or washing dishes or whatever else. Now, I mean, I can put off cleaning the living room for a week without even realizing that I'm doing it. I'm sticking with sobriety. I've got no plans and hardly any will to start using again, but even after all these years, I'm still trying to learn how to live a healthy life without that crutch, without the ability to make my problems and, indeed, my soul completely disappear for a few hours, to give me perspective on how trivial handling those tasks should be. I have to learn how to cobble together a break for myself. I don't mean time spent not working, I mean time spent not worrying about the work I need to do. I swear I spend more time worrying about being productive than I do actually being productive. And while I'm definitely getting better about it, it's been an uphill battle that I've been fighting since before I even thought about starting this channel. The closest thing I can get to one of those breaks is sleeping, but that's not the kind of thing where you wake up with a fresh perspective like you do when you drink. No matter how restful the sleep, I still feel just emotionally exhausted. Because from the perspective of someone who grew up on these breaks, it feels like I've been working nonstop for 4 years, when really that work is just sobriety. I'm still learning how to manage myself without these breaks, how to compartmentalize effectively so it doesn't feel like I have to solve 100 different problems just to make progress in one small area of my life. But one thing is for certain, drugs and alcohol might have helped me grow when I was younger, but I was growing anyways. And once I learned how to handle my drugs, I'd learned just about everything that they possibly could have taught me. While, yes, sometimes I want to have a drink more than just about anything, I don't ever want to go back to drinking. In my sobriety, I've gained something that I value deeply, my ambition. I'm somebody who wants to constantly improve herself and her circumstances. Drives me crazy sometimes, but I know that the minute I lost that ambition, I'd feel like I was just wasting away, and the depression spiral would start all over again. That's why I refuse to drink or smoke. I don't want to let myself get too comfortable, too complacent, and at the end of the day, once you've had your handful of novel experiences, that's all the drugs can give you. Complacency. And okayness with the status quo. More than dying or losing my channel or even becoming lonely, what scares me more than anything is being fine with being fine. So, while I've got a lot of progress to make before I catch up with some of the other people my age, I'll always have my sobriety, and so I'll always have my motivation. And while it might be too early to call it, I deeply believe that that's enough to carry me through my whole life. Before I close out this week's video and get some much-needed sleep, I would just like to, as always, thank the patrons. Videos like this would not even be remotely possible without them, and I'd especially like to thank the patrons who are donating $10 or more monthly, such as Ada Avery, Ayla Scott, Alex Zenla, Almost Dead Again, Arda Aurelia, Atheist, Big Time Jim, Broiled Lemming, Bjorb, Cappy, Cass, Charlotte, Cornelius Nelson, Darius Fazier, Demise, Dennis Valshakamer, Dominic Johann, Erica, Eva Knight, Finboy Fishing, Franz Johannes Fuellner, Gab, Haunted Mystic, Holly Schmidt, IW, Joannis, Jake Everdeen, Jared Drake, Jonah Shee, Jonas, JP, Lake, Lancaster, Laura M., Lil Bunda, Lily Leons, Madison Crater, Michaela, Mina, Monkey Monk's Monkey Monastery, Mr. Cococo, Neris, Neurofilter, Nicole, Nomad Delilah Jester, Panda, Poof Donut, Rio, CeeLo, Sean Hamilton, Shay Theus, Sky, Solaris, Stelly, Summer Celine Garnet Midnight, Super, Swatchbox, The Coom Slayer, Trash Can Teddy, and Yas the Boss. This video took a whole lot out of me. It's not every video that I end up reflecting on so much of my past and kind of opening up some old wounds like that, but I gotta say, I feel pretty good about it. So even though it was a little bit monotonous, maybe, hopefully you guys enjoyed, and I'll be back soon with another one. Thank you.